When I first moved to Willow Ridge, it felt like stepping into one of those picture-perfect postcards. The streets were lined with perfectly trimmed hedges, and every house had that charming cookie-cutter look. People greeted each other warmly, kids played on swings in the park, and everything seemed so peaceful. My husband, David, was thrilled when we found our new home. A cozy little place with a backyard big enough for me to feel connected to my roots. To be honest, I wasn't sure at first. Coming from decades of farming life, where open fields stretched as far as the eye could see, living in a gated community felt strange. But David convinced me it would be nice to slow down, enjoy some peace, and leave the chaos of running a multi-million-dollar farming business behind. For the first few months, things went smoothly. Our neighbors were polite, if a bit nosy. They'd often stop by to introduce themselves or comment on how quaint our decorations looked during holidays. I didn't mind. It was different from the hustle of farm life, but it had its own charm. Then came the tractor. Now let me explain something about this tractor. It's not just any old machine sitting in my driveway. It's my asterisk tractor. It's been with me since the early days when I started turning my family's tiny patch of land into what eventually became a massive agricultural empire. That tractor helped me plow through tough soil, survive storms, and grow crops that fed thousands of families. It's more than metal and tires. It's a piece of my history, my identity. So naturally, when we moved here, I brought it along. Not because I needed it anymore. I have plenty of newer models stored safely at my farms, but because it reminded me of who I am. At first, no one said anything. A couple of neighbors even complimented it, saying it gave the neighborhood a rustic touch. I thought they understood. But then, one sunny afternoon, a crisp white envelope appeared under my front door. Inside was a letter from the Homeowners Association, the HOA. It politely informed me that my tractor violated Section 7.2 of their covenants, which stated that only approved vehicles could be parked in driveways. Apparently, my beloved John Deere didn't make the cut. I stared at the letter, dumbfounded. Was this really happening? These people wanted me to get rid of my tractor. The same tractor that symbolized years of hard work, determination, and success. I couldn't believe it. At first, I assumed it was some kind of mistake. Maybe someone misunderstood. Surely, once I explained its significance, they'd understand. But deep down, I knew better. There was something about the tone of that letter, cold, impersonal, final, that made my stomach churn. This wasn't just about rules. It was about control. And suddenly, the picturesque neighborhood I'd fallen in love with didn't seem so welcoming anymore. That night, I sat on my porch staring at the tractor, wondering what to do next. Should I give in and move it somewhere else? Or should I stand my ground and fight back? Little did I know, this decision would set off a chain reaction that would change not just my life, but the entire neighborhood. The next morning, I decided to take action. I wasn't going to let some piece of paper dictate what I could or couldn't do with my own property. So I wrote a polite but firm response to the HOA. In it, I explained the sentimental value of the tractor and how it represented years of hard work and personal growth. I ended the letter by asking them to reconsider their stance, hoping they'd see reason. For a few days, there was silence. No reply, no follow-up letters, nothing. I started to think maybe they'd backed off. Perhaps they realized how unreasonable their demand was. But then, one evening, as I was watering the plants in my front yard, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw Mrs. Hargrove, the head of the HOA, standing there with a clipboard in hand and a tight smile on her face. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice overly sweet. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I replied, though her presence made me uneasy. There was something about the way she carried herself, like she owned the place, that rubbed me the wrong way. "I wanted to discuss your situation," she continued, glancing pointedly at the tractor parked in my driveway. "We received your letter, and while I appreciate your attachment to this Vehicle, we must uphold the standards of Willow Ridge. Standards, I repeated, trying to keep my tone calm. You mean rules that tell people what they can and can't park in their driveways. She tilted her head slightly, as if she were speaking to a child who didn't quite understand the rules. It's about maintaining the aesthetic appeal of our community. Your tractor, while undoubtedly meaningful to you, doesn't align with the vision we have for Willow Ridge. Aesthetic appeal, I asked, feeling my frustration rise. Are you serious? This isn't just some rusty old machine. It's part of who I am. Mrs. Hargrove's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. I understand that, truly. However, rules are put in place for a reason. If everyone did whatever they pleased, the neighborhood would lose its charm. Her words hit a nerve. Charm. Was she really suggesting that my tractor, a symbol of everything I'd worked for, was ruining the charm of this place? I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay composed. Arguing with her wouldn't solve anything, at least not right now. Well, I said finally, I don't plan on moving it. Maybe we can find a compromise. Her expression hardened ever so slightly. Compromise isn't always possible, Mrs. Thompson. Please consider the consequences of non-compliance. Consequences. The word lingered in the air between us, heavy and ominous. She gave me one last tight-lipped smile before turning on her heel and walking away, leaving me standing there with a sinking feeling in my chest. That night, I told David about the encounter. He listened quietly, his brow furrowed. When I finished, he sighed. Maybe you should think about moving it, he suggested gently, just to avoid trouble. Trouble, I echoed, incredulous. They're the ones causing trouble. Why should I give in? I'm just saying, he replied, holding up his hands defensively. Maybe it's not worth fighting over. These people aren't going to back down easily. His words stung more than I cared to admit. Part of me wondered if he was right. If standing my ground was worth the potential fallout. But another part of me refused to let go. That tractor wasn't just a possession. It was a reminder of where I came from and how far I'd come. Giving in felt like betraying myself. As the days passed, the tension grew. Neighbors who had once waved hello now avoided eye contact. Some muttered under their breath as they walked past my house. One even left an anonymous note in my mailbox. Please comply with the rules. You're making things difficult for everyone. Difficult for everyone. How was I the problem here? All I'd done was refuse to hide a part of myself because someone else thought it didn't fit their idea of perfection. Yet, the isolation was palpable. For the first time since moving to Willow Ridge, I felt like an outsider in my own home. But instead of backing down, I found myself digging in deeper. This wasn't just about a tractor anymore. It was about principle. And I wasn't about to let anyone bully me into submission. As the days turned into weeks, the cold shoulder from my neighbors became impossible to ignore. What had once been a friendly wave or a casual good morning was now replaced by awkward silences and hurried footsteps. It was as if I'd suddenly sprouted horns and a tail overnight. Even the kids who used to play near my yard stopped coming around, their laughter replaced by an eerie quiet that made the neighborhood feel more like a ghost town than the welcoming community it had seemed when we first moved in. David tried to reassure me. It's just a phase, he said one evening as we sat on the porch. People will get over it. But I wasn't so sure. This wasn't just about my tractor anymore. It felt personal. These people didn't just want me to move the tractor. They wanted me to conform, to blend in, to become another faceless cog in their well-oiled suburban machine. And the more I resisted, the more they pushed back. The letters kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last. The first was polite, almost apologetic. The second warned of fines. The third outright threatened legal action if I didn't comply. By the time the fourth letter arrived, I could practically hear Mrs. Hargrove's smug voice in the typed words. Asterisk failure to adhere to the covenants will result in escalating penalties. Asterisk. Fines. Penalties. For what? for refusing to erase a part of myself. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Every envelope that landed in my mailbox felt like another punch to the gut. Another reminder that these people saw me as a problem to be solved, rather than a human being with feelings and memories tied to that tractor. One afternoon, while I was out watering the plants, a neighbor approached me, Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. She was usually warm and chatty, always eager to share stories about her grandchildren. But this time, she looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if someone might be watching. "Listen," she whispered, leaning closer. "I don't agree with what they're doing. That tractor means something to you. I get that. But you need to be careful. The HOA. They don't mess around. They'll make your life miserable if you keep fighting them." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Was it really that serious? Could they actually make things worse for me? I thanked her for the warning, but inside, I felt conflicted. Part of me wanted to throw in the towel, to move the tractor and avoid any further drama. But another part, the stubborn, fiery part, refused to give up. If I backed down now, what message would that send? That I was willing to sacrifice my identity just to fit in. That night, David and I had another heated discussion. He argued that I was letting pride cloud my judgment. "You're picking a fight you don't need to win," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "Why not just store the tractor somewhere else? It's not worth all this stress." "It's not about the tractor," I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. "Don't you see? It's about standing up for myself, for us. If I let them take this away from me, what's next? Are they going to tell me what color curtains I can hang or what kind of car I can drive?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're blowing this out of proportion." His words stung, but they also fueled my determination. Maybe I was blowing things out of proportion, but maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. Maybe someone had to push back against these ridiculous rules before they consumed everyone. The tension between us grew thicker with each passing day. Our conversations became strained, filled with unspoken arguments and lingering resentment. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to turn against me. Some neighbors avoided me altogether, while others whispered behind closed doors. One even suggested I should sell my house and leave if I didn't like the rules. Leave? After everything I'd worked for? No, that wasn't an option. Instead, I started thinking about ways to fight back. Not violently, of course, but strategically. I knew I couldn't take on the HOA alone, especially since they seemed to hold all the cards. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to expose their absurdity to the world. A way to show them that I wasn't just some ordinary homeowner. They were dealing with someone who didn't back down easily. And so, late one night, I pulled out my laptop and began typing. I wrote about my story, my tractor, and the lengths the HOA was going to in order to enforce their rules. I poured my heart into every word, making sure to highlight the absurdity of it all. When I finished, I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was making a mistake. Then I hit send. Little did I know, that single email would change everything. The moment I hit send on that email, a strange mix of relief and dread washed over me. Relief because I'd finally taken a stand, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever felt powerless against the iron grip of an HOA. Dread because I knew there would be consequences. You don't challenge people like Mrs. Hargrove and her committee without expecting some kind of backlash. At first, nothing happened. Days passed, and life in Willow Ridge continued as usual, or at least as usual as it could be with everyone tiptoeing around me like I was a ticking time bomb. The HOA didn't respond to my email, which wasn't surprising. They probably thought ignoring me would make me go away. But deep down, I knew they were plotting their next move. People like them always do. Then, one morning, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed with a notification from social media. Curious, I opened the app and froze. Someone had shared my story online, a local blogger, to be exact. The post had already gained hundreds of likes and comments, with people tagging friends and sharing their own frustrations about HOAs. Within hours, my little act of defiance had gone viral. Reporters started calling. At first, it was just small-town newspapers and radio stations, but soon bigger outlets picked up the story. Headlines popped up everywhere. Asterisk, asterisk, millionaire farmer stands up to suburban tyranny. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Willow Ridge HOA tries to ban tractor. Resident fights back. Asterisk, asterisk, camera crews showed up outside my house, and neighbors gawked as news vans lined the streets. It was surreal. 1 minute, I was just another homeowner trying to live her life. The next, I was the face of a movement. Mrs. Hargrove looked like she'd swallowed a lemon every time a microphone was shoved in her face. "We're simply enforcing the rules," she stammered during one particularly awkward interview. "This is about maintaining property values and community standards." Community standards. I almost laughed out loud when I heard that. What standard were they trying to maintain? A world where individuality was crushed under the weight of conformity, where people lived in fear of being fined for having too many flower pots or painting their front door the wrong shade of blue. As the media frenzy grew, so did the cracks in the HOA's carefully constructed facade. Neighbors who had once avoided me like the plague began reaching out, some privately, others publicly. One woman confessed that she hated the restrictive rules but was too scared to speak up. Another admitted she'd been fined for hanging wind chimes on her porch. Even Mr. Thompson from across the street stopped by to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to those tyrants. But not everyone was supportive. Some residents sided with the HOA, accusing me of causing trouble and making the neighborhood look bad. Anonymous comments flooded online articles, calling me selfish, entitled, and disruptive. One person even wrote, "If she doesn't like the rules, she should leave." Reading those words hurt more than I expected. Not because they were true. I knew I had every right to fight for what mattered to me, but because they reminded me how divided we'd become. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us, the entire neighborhood, and whether we could find a way to coexist without losing ourselves in the process. Amidst all the chaos, David pulled me aside one evening. His expression was conflicted, torn between pride and worry. "You've really stirred the pot this time," he said quietly. "Are you ready for whatever comes next?" I took a deep breath, staring out at the sea of reporters camped outside our house. Was I ready? Honestly, I didn't know. But one thing was certain. I couldn't turn back now. This fight had grown bigger than me, bigger than the tractor, bigger than Willow Ridge itself. It was about proving that no rule, no matter how rigid, could erase the things that made us who we are. And maybe, just maybe, it was also about teaching the HOA a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The pressure was mounting, and I could feel it in every corner of my life. Reporters camped outside my house day and night. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, and the HOA seemed to be scrambling to regain control. Mrs. Hargrove, once so confident in her authority, now looked like a deer caught in headlights every time a camera flashed or a microphone was shoved in her face. It was clear they hadn't anticipated this kind of backlash, but neither had I. One afternoon, as I watered the plants in my front yard, a man approached me. Someone I didn't recognize. He introduced himself as a lawyer named Mark Reynolds, representing a group of homeowners who were fed up with the HOA's overreach. "We've been watching your story," he said, his tone serious but kind. "You're not alone in this fight. A lot of people here feel the same way you do. They're just too afraid to speak up." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. Until then, I'd felt isolated, like I was battling the HOA all by myself. But hearing that others shared my frustration gave me strength. Maybe this wasn't just about me standing up for my tractor. It was about giving a voice to everyone who'd been silenced by fear. Mark explained that the HOA's rules weren't just strict. Some of them might actually be illegal. "They can't fine you indefinitely without due process," he said, "and if their actions are deemed discriminatory or unreasonable, we could take legal action against them." Legal action. The phrase sent a shiver down my spine. As much as I hated what the HOA was doing, the thought of dragging this out in court felt exhausting. But Mark assured me it wouldn't come to that. At least, not yet. Sometimes, all it takes is showing them you're willing to fight back, he said. That's often enough to make them back off. Armed with new resolve, I decided to call a meeting, not at the HOA clubhouse, but at my corporate office downtown. If they wanted to play hardball, I'd show them how it's done. When the HOA board members arrived, they looked utterly out of place in their pastel blazers and khakis, surrounded by mahogany furniture and framed awards celebrating my decades of success in agriculture. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in their eyes. "Let's get one thing straight," I began, leaning forward in my chair. "I'm not just some ordinary homeowner. I built my fortune from scratch, and I know how to stand my ground. Your attempts to bully me into compliance won't work." Mrs. Hargrove tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand. "No, let me finish. You can keep sending letters and threatening fines, but trust me, you don't want to see what happens next. If you push this any further, I'll file a lawsuit alleging discrimination against rural heritage. And believe me, you won't like the attention that brings." Silence fell over the room. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence visibly shaken. Even Mrs. Hargrove, who had always been so poised and unflappable, looked rattled. Finally, one of the quieter members spoke up. Maybe we should reconsider our stance," he muttered, avoiding eye contact with the others. Reconsider. That was the first sign of weakness I'd seen from them. I pressed my advantage. "Here's the deal. Drop this nonsense immediately. Amend the covenants to allow farm-related equipment on residential properties, and issue a formal apology. Do that, and I'll consider ending this." They hesitated, clearly weighing their options. I could see the wheels turning in their heads. The last thing they wanted was a public relations nightmare, or worse, a costly legal battle they couldn't win. After what felt like an eternity, Mrs. Hargrove finally nodded, though her jaw was clenched tight. "We'll discuss it," she said stiffly. "Good," I replied, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. "I expect to hear from you soon." As they filed out of the office, I felt a surge of triumph, but also caution. This wasn't over yet. They might have blinked, but I knew better than to celebrate too early. People like them rarely gave up without a fight. Still, for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a small smile. The HOA had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. I wasn't backing down. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It was official, typed on the HOA's crisp stationery, and signed by none other than Mrs. Hargrove herself. At first glance, it looked like another warning or thinly veiled threat, but as I read through the lines, my lips curled into a satisfied smile. They were backing down. The HOA had agreed to drop all fines against me, amend their covenants to allow farm-related equipment in driveways, and issue a formal apology for their miscommunication. The wording was carefully crafted to save face, but the message was clear. They'd lost this round. I couldn't help but laugh as I showed the letter to David. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "You actually did it," he said, shaking his head with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "They caved." "I told you they would," I replied, though deep down, even I hadn't been entirely sure. This victory felt sweet, not just because I'd won, but because it proved that standing up for yourself could make a difference. And not just for me. The amended rules meant that no one else in Willow Ridge would have to fight this battle alone. But I wasn't done yet. If the HOA thought a simple letter would smooth things over, they were sorely mistaken. I decided to throw a block party, a celebration of sorts, and invite the entire neighborhood. To drive the point home, I decorated my beloved tractor with balloons and ribbons, adding a bright banner across its hood that read, **** proudly permitted by Willow Ridge HOA ***. The day of the party arrived, And despite the awkwardness that had lingered between us, most of the neighbors showed up. Some came out of curiosity, others out of obligation, but a few genuinely seemed happy to see me. Kids ran around laughing, music played softly in the background, and plates of food covered the picnic tables set up in my driveway. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. Mrs. Hargrove, however, stayed conspicuously absent. Rumor had it she claimed to be ill, though everyone knew better. Her absence spoke volumes. She couldn't bear to face me or admit defeat publicly. But her decision to skip the event only made my victory sweeter. As the afternoon wore on, several neighbors approached me privately, thanking me for standing up to the HOA. One woman confessed, "Life in Willow Ridge hasn't gone back to the way it was before, that perfect, picture postcard version of suburbia I first walked into. And honestly, I'm glad. The cracks in the neighborhood's polished surface have widened, and while some people still cling to the old ways, others are starting to question them. Change doesn't happen overnight, but I can see it happening, slowly, quietly, like seeds sprouting after a long winter." My tractor still sits proudly in the driveway, its presence now protected by the amended HOA rules. It's become more than just a machine. It's a symbol of standing your ground, of refusing to shrink yourself to fit someone else's mold. Strangers passing through the neighborhood sometimes stop to take pictures of it, adorned with flowers and ribbons during holidays. Kids love climbing onto it, with permission of course, pretending they're farmers steering a mighty beast across fields. It's brought joy to people in ways I never expected. But the real change isn't about tractors or rules. It's about attitudes. Neighbors who once kept their heads down are speaking up more often. Last month, a young couple successfully petitioned the HOA to allow vegetable gardens in front yards, something that had been banned under aesthetic guidelines. Another resident organized a community cleanup day, turning what could have been a chore into a fun event complete with barbecues and music. Even Mrs. Hargrove seems less rigid these days. She still chairs the HOA meetings, but her tone is softer, her demands less extreme. Maybe she's finally realizing that compromise isn't a dirty word. David jokes that I've become the unofficial leader of Willow Ridge, though I'd argue I'm just living my life out loud. People come to me for advice, not just about the HOA, but about how to handle conflicts at work, how to negotiate better terms with contractors, or even how to plant tomatoes without killing them. I don't mind helping. It feels good to share what I've learned over the years. Looking back, I realized this whole ordeal taught me something important. Power isn't always about money or influence. Sometimes it's about courage, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone dim your light. Standing up to the HOA wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted myself. But every challenge made me stronger. Every pushback reminded me why I started fighting in the first place. There's a saying my mother used to repeat: "You can either bend to the wind or grow roots deep enough to hold your ground." For so long, I thought blending in meant finding peace. Now I know that true peace comes from staying true to yourself, no matter the cost. As for Willow Ridge, it's slowly becoming a place where individuality is celebrated instead of stifled. Not everyone agrees on everything, and that's okay. What matters is that we're learning to listen to each other, to find common ground even when our differences seem vast. Every morning, as I sip my coffee on the porch and watch the sun rise over the rooftops, I feel a quiet sense of pride. This neighborhood may not be perfect, but it's growing, just like those wildflowers I planted last spring. They didn't follow any rules, yet somehow they thrived. And maybe, just maybe, so will we.